Good afternoon and welcome to the second session of today's Interact Global, the free virtual edition of Nomensa's Interact conference. Hello, if it's your first session, or welcome back if you have been watching sessions over the last 5 days. We already had a very inspiring session this morning from Angel Brown, Group Director Experience Strategy at Digitas Health, and talked about strategic design methods for business impact. If you haven't been able to join the session, it will be on YouTube next week. Before we start, please do get involved and say hello to each other in the chat. Make sure you've switched your chat settings to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there are any audio issues or issues with the stream, and we'll try to get things fixed for you as soon as possible. We are also using auto-generated captions for this session. Some of these may not be 100% accurate. However, when we share the talks publicly on our YouTube channel, we'll ensure the transcripts are accurate. Now we're really excited for our second session, which is a panel leadership discussion. In this session, our panel will be discussing how leadership is evolving and what makes a good leader today, in 2022 and beyond. Our panel is made of 3 leaders that stand tall in design. Felicia Williams, Design Director at Twitter. Sophie, Director Human-Centered Design and Customer Experience at UK Health and Security Agency, and Schepper, Chief Sales and Marketing Director at Swissquote. And the panel will be chaired by Nomensa's own Senior Business Developer Manager, Zoe van Wenen. Please to ask a lot of questions using the Q&A box. Zoe will be asking these to the 3 leaders at the end, and we'll try to get through as many as you can. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Zoe to begin. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Manuela. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion on design leadership today. So for me personally, over the last, since the start of my career, I've worked closely with many design leaders and design-focused organizations. So that's why I'm excited to be chairing today's panel, especially since the last couple of years, I've seen a strong shift where design is becoming part of the wider business strategy and has earned its seat in the boardroom. Where, for example, in 2008, Don Draper was described to me as being the example of creative leader, and where today we see a clear shift and diversification in what leadership's like design leader embodies. So that's a good thing, and I'm very happy that today we can really go into this topic. And I'm very honored to be able to introduce to you our 3 panelists for today. As Manuela mentioned, we have leaders here that stand tall in the world of design. We have Felicia Williams. She's Design Director at Twitter. And then we have Schepper, who is Chief Sales and Marketing at Swissquote. And Sophie, Director of Human-Centered and Customer Experience at the UK Health Security Agency. It would be great if each one of you can shortly introduce yourself. Jan, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the invitation. Happy to be part of this panel. So as you said, I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer. Maybe in terms of organization, it is about sales, marketing, but it's also about product management. It's about customer care and investment product. So it's basically every department that are facing or designing the customer experience are part or under my leadership. So it's an exciting role, and I'm happy to be here. And it's really the willing of Swissquote, which is a bank, but I think we are a different bank than the others because we really we are driven by our mission. So we have a strong focus on the brand as organizing principle of all the activities that we have and designing this experience.
Excellent, thank you. Felicia, would you give a brief intro of yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Nomensa, for inviting me. It's so awesome to be back, having done some talks for you guys in the past. Like Zoe said, I'm Felicia Williams. I am a design director at Twitter. I'm based in the UK. I'm based in London. And I oversee an area of work called emerging business or revenue diversity, which is a very boring term for a very exciting area of work, which is all about helping helping creators, helping individuals, and helping small businesses get paid on the platform. So lots of exciting new products are coming out of Twitter, especially through my team. You may have heard of some of them, including things like super follows, which allows individual creators to be able to create a super followers account Twitter Blue, which is a subscription product, a premium product for Twitter, as well as professional profiles. Now, small businesses can register with Twitter for a business-specific profile. So very exciting stuff, and excited to talk about design leadership today.
Thank you. Sophie, if you would also give a brief introduction.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sophie Dennis. I have this rather long job title of officially Deputy Director. There isn't a director of it, don't worry. I'm Deputy Director of Human-Centered Design and Customer Experience at the UK Health Security Agency. If you haven't heard of that and have no idea what it is, don't worry, it has only existed for a week. It is a bringing together and a merger between NHS Test and Trace, which is where I've been working for over a year, with large parts of what has been up until last Friday, Public Health England. So bringing together that much broader health protection activity from Public Health England. Our mission is to protect the health security of the UK nation. Right now, of course, our focus is on coronavirus and the enduring and ongoing COVID emergency response, but we also then have responsibility for areas such as air pollution, the impact of things like environmental and climate change on the health of the nation, on other environmental hazards such as radiation, chemical and biological threats to the health of the nation. And underlying that, as COVID has shown, is the impact of the way in which enduring health inequalities is also a threat to the health of the nation. So we still don't completely know what that means. A lot of my job and my fellows in our customer communications and innovation group within UXA or UKHSA, I never know which one we're supposed to be saying, is really to define what does that mean, and questions about like, who do we have customers in public health? How do we operate as a customer function that you would recognize in the private sector within a public sector organization, are really exciting topics. And what is the role of design leadership in that? Being in this incredibly privileged position, I think, of having got design leadership at a really very senior level in that organization. Now, how do we make that stick and count, is very much sort of on the forefront of my mind.
Wow, that's a good introduction of the many things that you do. Thank you very much. And I mean, I have to say, normally during a panel, we'll be able to see who we have surrounded ourselves with, because we'll be sitting in a room full of people. And now everyone is hiding behind their screen. So just to give an indication of who is present with us today or who signed up, and don't worry, I cannot switch on any cameras of the people who are attending, but I do have a list of the people who are here. And there's a wide range of professionals and organizations. So we have UXers, we have designers, we have head of designs, product owners, product leaders from organizations like Amazon Europe, Bumble, IBM, Virgin Money, Lease Plan, WeTransfer, a lot. So, you know, we're in good company. So I think let's just get started. I think everyone is very eager to learn from you, and please do share, you know, anecdotes, your personal stories. So let's get started with the first one. Oh, and yeah, as Manuela said, at the end we have a Q&A. Just make sure that when you type in your question in the chat box to also mention who the question is for. That would be great. So yeah, let's get into the first question. How is leadership changing, or has changed, especially taking into consideration, as Sophie also just said, the last 1.5 years with the pandemic and COVID changing the way that we work and interact? Sophie, shall we then start with you?
I was wondering if you were going to throw that to me as a starting point.
Yeah.
How has design leadership changed? It's a weird one to look back on, because this is almost like what design leadership means to me right now is doing it in the context of leading design in an emergency response organization, which has been, I think, really good in many ways for the practice of design, particularly in the public sector. We were in danger of becoming like the people who didn't deliver anything, the people who are like, oh, we need to do a 6-month discovery, oh, we must, you know, do some alpha, oh, I just want to do some more exploration. And what the COVID response really pulled us together around is like, that's an indulgence. We need to get good services out next Friday. We need to get them out by the end of the month. We don't have time to spend more time reflecting. And we have absolutely not got it all right. Like when you are trying to deliver services that fast, you are a mass of compromises and constraints. But I think the fact that it forced us into operating much more like our colleagues in startup land, in terms of saying what's good enough to get out the door, and then yes, of course we will iterate and we will commit to iterating on that, has been both healthy and exciting. It's been very challenging to then form from nothing a design team in what has been set up from the start as an entirely remote organization. Test and Trace formed in the middle of lockdown. We don't have an office. We've never all been in an office. The exciting things about that have been able to assemble talent from all over the UK, like, with no geographic constraint, which has been amazing to kind of go, what's our wish list of the most amazing people working in user-centered design today, and can we get them to work for us without a, oh no, but they're based in Bristol, oh, but they're based in Newcastle, would they commute? That's been brilliant. I think the challenge then for leaders is that you don't have the spidey sense of being in an office with people. Like, so often when we've then had a challenge with the interaction of a team or something like that, it's kind of like, I would have spotted that way earlier if I was physically in the office with this team. I would just have spotted that the interaction didn't seem right. I would have seen that, you know, one team is interacting really well with each other and doing lots of collaboration. This other team seems really just like head down and they're not really talking. I'd be able to see their walls and what they're working on. And you just have to work super extra hard. And I will not say that we have cracked this at all yet, but we're working on it. I think as a leader, there's a need to get really mindful and sharp about how you're getting that situational awareness, how you're leading through a team of leaders, which is, you know, when you're not in there with the team. So that's sort of, I think, the pandemic thing. I think more broadly in terms of changes with design leadership, I think that real emphasis and mindfulness about inclusion as a profession has been a really important shift over the last few years. And that's, you know, very central on my mind, is the need to make sure that if we're designing services for the whole of the country, we are not representative of the people that we serve. And that's, you know, a big issue that we all need to work on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, excellent. And Felicia, I would like to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Sure. You know, as I was thinking about this question, even like prior to panel, I agree a lot with what Sophie said. I thought, you know, there's definitely a need for, there's an emphasis on acceleration of product, iteration. These are things that are fairly, these are things that are fairly standard inside of a lot of big tech organizations like Twitter, or some of my previous organizations like Facebook or Microsoft. But one of the things that I definitely think that has had to change, and kind of touching on a bit of the example that you gave previously, Zoe, about the Mad Men example, is there's this phrase that I think a lot of people have used, regardless of design or not. This is like, you know, keep it professional. You know, when you're having these conversations, especially if they're tense and things like that, keep it professional. And usually keep it professional means no emotion, like baggage at the door, home is at the door, you know, home is somewhere else, work is here, right? And the reality is, with the pandemic, home and work collided enormously. People are rolling out of bed, people who have families, people who probably maybe didn't have spaces that weren't set up for work from home. You know, these things are like colliding enormously. And this adage of like, you can make this separation, and that separation is both healthy and also it's healthy and helpful to your work, was really challenged. And so, and I think it also exposed some really important differences in terms of how people were not only set up for success, whether their home environment was one that could set them up for success or not, right? And some of the deltas between even just levels of work in terms of you know, what your ability is to create and set yourself up for success in a pandemic. For instance, if you happen to be a single parent, right? How difficult was it for single parents to be able to work through this pandemic if they didn't have the services and support that they needed in order to put in order to put the time and care that they needed into their children while also working online. What if you happen to be someone who is early and starting out in your career, and all you have is just, I don't know, a studio flat and like nowhere else to go to be able to clear your mind or be able to, to create that space, that sense of space between work or not. And of course, there's a raging debate now as we're starting to come out of the pandemic about, okay, how much do we want to keep of this flexible remote work? How much are we going back into the office? How much are people wanting to stay back? And it's incredibly polarizing. Those people who have the space, those people who have the support, those people who have the resources, they're saying, hey, I want that flexibility. I know there are a lot of young designers, especially people who started new jobs inside of the pandemic, who are really craving getting back into the office and working with other people because they crave that collaborative space. And I think a lot of leaders do too, but then they also want that ability to be able to stay home and to be able to have that time at home. So it's been very interesting how important it is to raise your emotional intelligence around these issues. You cannot pretend like everything can be done without that emotional intelligence meter. You need that as leaders, you need that as people.
So did that also make you adapt over the last year and a half? I mean, maybe you've always been an emotional leader and with a high EQ, but over the last year and a half, has that developed?
So, well, certainly that's always really been my MO. But one of the things that I found quite interesting is how much I've had to help or shepherd other leaders in that. I think certainly some people are more adept at this than others. And sometimes you have to kind of call people out. It's like, hey, listen, especially because for those people who are not as adept at the emotional intelligence portion, they see it as an optional, as a nuisance sometimes. We don't need to talk about your day. We don't need to we don't need to have the small chat, the water cooler chat.
Lawbreaker approach.
Yeah, the stuff that you would get when you're just walking down the hallway and you happen to say hi to somebody because you were going to use the restroom or you were grabbing a snack or you were getting a lunch. Those things aren't possible now. You have a 30-minute or 1 hour time window, and you have to build that in. And some people find that just too much of a lift. And it's like, actually, these things are really important. I say this time and time again. When it comes to peacetime, you need to make your relationships during the peacetime, because at some point there's going to be a war. And you need to be able to draw from that bank of all of the goodwill and all of the relationship building that you've been doing over the peacetime. Because when it comes to war, that's when the nerves are frayed. That's when the small talk is done. That's when you're coming to people and you're saying, this is what I need. But if you haven't done that beforehand, you're going to have a lot of trouble. You're going to have a lot of uphill battles. So I think that the remote work culture has really helped to key people in on how important that is.
Excellent. So thank you for that. I find it very intriguing. I hope we have a little bit of time left because I would like to deep dive on what you said and also what Sophie said about inclusivity. But you just mentioned banks. So let's now move over to Jan. Please, if you would also go a little bit into detail over what has changed and shifted.
Yeah,
for you.
I think from leadership perspective, the pandemic was very challenging. At least for me, it was challenging because I really like to see my people and be close to them and walk around, being on the sales desk, being with the designers, talking with the marketing people, customer care to really checking, sharing and creating together. And if then you have this forced home office, it is challenging. Of course, you can live with it and you adapt and basically you give a little bit. You have to have the trust, which is easier if people are already around since a long time and actually he's a professional. He can work and you trust him. It's more difficult than when you're in a phase like we are with rapid growth. There's a lot of new hires that are joining, so you have to make the interviews via Zoom. You're hiring and then you have to integrate the team, which is already settled. It's hard for new joiners to join this virtual team. It's definitely not ideal because the onboarding in person is just much stronger. And also in terms of creativity, ideation, conceptualization, I think there it's challenging. I have not seen a system which is ideal or as good as being all together in a room and have a physical meeting. of course, you try and have the softs and whiteboards, and it works in a way, but in my opinion, it's not as good. But in terms of efficiency, there are a lot of gains in terms of efficiency. I can do client meetings, like on a day, I do 4 client meetings, and before I did once client meeting because it took me the travel to go there, to launch, to come back. So in terms of efficiency, I think we gained a lot of efficiencies. And now, as we're going back to the new normal, I think we have to balance it so that we keep the efficiencies of the new processes, but that we come back in terms of working together and having the creativity and the trust relationship building, which is really needed. And you see that if you did like 1 hour, 1 year, just Zoom meetings, and then you reconnect and have a physical meeting, and you go for a lunch or a dinner after, or a beer, you immediately come to another relationship level, and then you say, oh, how did we do it actually just on the Zoom meetings, and you start discussing about other stuff that before, because it's just structured and tuned to efficiency.
That makes me, sorry for interrupting you, but because I can hear consistency in your answers, and there are actually 2 things that I would then like to focus on with the 3 of you. Is, because of, as you said, everyone was at home, the interaction between people, between the teams, and as a designer, your creativity normally, I would say, comes from the outside world. It's the interactions, it's the experience that you have outside. So my question, and what I was wondering as a design leader, how do you make sure that your team gets that inspiration and stays motivated? John, if you would like to continue on that question, or
maybe the other 2 have a better idea on how to.
Okay. Felicia, if you would.
It's really hard.
Sorry, Felicia, how did you keep your team inspired during a time of lockdown?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually interesting. Very similarly to Jan, he and I were both going through a lot of there's a lot of growth that's happening at Twitter as well, and so a lot of people are joining the company remotely, which is a bit tough. And the inspiration, I will say this: when you're working in a tech company like Twitter, I think the inspiration actually tends to come from online. Like, yes, it is the collaboration together is important. It's vitally important. But I would say that oftentimes what's happening is that people are sharing, they're sharing threadicles, they're sharing Pinterest boards, they're sharing like links to articles that are interesting, especially because a lot of the things that we're doing are digital and not analog. Back when I used to work in hardware, the physical sharing was very important because of the analog nature of things. But I will say this, one thing that is, I think, has been challenging, that's connected to this, that I've had to work on, and I am continuing to work on with the team, is the sense of connectedness, especially at a distance, at time zone distances. So in my particular team, we're very global. I've got folks who work in the United States on the West Coast. I've got folks who work on the East Coast of North America, but both in the United States and in Canada. And I've got a whole brand new team that's working here in the EMEA. And everybody has a different cultural lens, even in the United States. From state to state, you might as well call them different countries, different cultural lenses. And then here, obviously, in the EMEA, different cultural lenses, different ways of working, different value systems and things like that. And so as I'm trying to inspire or help the team closely knit together, there are natural friction points. How Americans like to work is different than perhaps how French people like to work, versus how young people like to work, versus how older people like to work, versus how people who live in big cities like to work, versus how people in smaller communities like to work. So I've tried very hard to find the nuggets where we have similarities, where we have, sometimes it's about good design, but sometimes it's about things that are outside of good design, feelings, things that we want to share from a principle standpoint. So that's been a lot of the work, trying to connect people through those things.
Okay, thank you. And then Sophie, I actually want to tweak that question a little bit for something that you said. I love how you said that you had to create a design for the entire country. So as I think one of the lessons that a lot of organizations learned during the pandemic was that they needed to make their services digitally accessible for everyone. So how did your role as a design leader and the responsibility of making it accessible, how did that change your role?
I think a really important part of that becomes how you are able to articulate the importance of accessible and inclusive design within that kind of nationwide service, particularly when you're talking about public health. So it's being able to tell the story, because I think a lot of your role as design leader becomes, you're not doing the design yourself, right? You are changing how people think about the problem and what they should be designing so that they design it differently. And so it was really honing and practicing the narrative that says how we design public services can, with the best of intentions, exacerbate health inequalities. When it is easier to access and use a service if you own a car, if you own a smartphone, if you, some of the things that Felicia was mentioning, if you have the economic situation to have, be able to have a separate room at home where you can work, so you can work from home effectively. If you have a large enough house that you can self-isolate from the rest of your family and use a separate bathroom, which is of course part of that advice if you're infectious. These things all, without anyone intending them to, can then worsen inequalities because they make it easier for people with means, by which we usually mean financial means, but potentially also social means and social connection, to keep themselves, their family and their community safe. That helps to focus everybody on the idea that making services accessible is not a nice to have or even a should have. It becomes a must have.
Necessity.
Now, like I said, in the white heat of we've just got to get it out by Friday, you can't always actually achieve that standard. But that is how you build that kind of narrative. And I think it's always, as a design leader, being able to have that narrative about the outcome and therefore what the design principles are. And then you trust the team to execute on that.
Thank you. We have to move on to the next question because we are eating up some time here. But thank you all very much for those answers. And I will actually go a little bit off script here because we have our questions. But I think you all said some very interesting things in the first part of the panel. So I'll kind of tweak the next question specifically on what you've said before. And then, so Felicia, we're talking about good design leaders. And you were talking about emotional intelligence, and that comes down really to empathy. I mean, as a design leader, it's, you need to have empathy, not just for your users to create the best user experience, but also for your team. And you were talking about people being a single mom or, parent or dad. And do you believe that as a design leader, should you be providing the same opportunity to everyone in your team, or adapt based on people's ability? Because they have different backgrounds, they have different positions. So do you believe that you should shift within your leadership towards the individuals within your team?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination. My answer may or may not be satisfying, but it's definitely a combination of both. I think there's always a usefulness and a benefit and an expectation that you should adapt to situations. I mean, that's, people who are brittle, they break, right? When change comes, they break, right? Resilience is important. Adaptability is important to hone resilience, and resilience is what allows growth. It's what allows you to be able to take on change. That said, it doesn't mean that adaptability doesn't mean being a completely different person, right? You still have foundational principles. You still have foundational things that you believe that make for good design, that make for good working relationships, that make for good products. Those things all should be broad enough, but solid enough that when you are adapting your style to, you know, a designer who may be struggling, say, with the work that they're doing, that you can maintain those principles, maintain those values, maintain that foundation, while also say, hey, here are some different tools, right, for you to be able to tackle this challenge. Same when you have somebody who's very successful. Hey, I want you to grow. Here's some different tools. You have these growth areas. Here's some different tools. I will say, you know, and it just thinking about one of the things that Sophie said, you know, it is really easy. Even leaders like myself, who, you know, I believe I've got good EQ, but it's really easy sometimes to forget that when you're speaking to somebody and you're giving them, you're suggesting different tools, you're suggesting things that you think would be a good idea, that they're still coming from your foundational set of values and your experience and your means, right? I remember being in a conversation once when I was working at Microsoft, and we were doing some UX design. I was working on the HoloLens. We were doing some UX design. We're talking about screens in space. People don't necessarily have to worry about the particular product, but I'll never forget one of the executives there. We were talking about the benefits, the benefits or the drawbacks of having multiple screens, large screens around you. And one of the executives said, well, you know, most people have at least like 3 or 4 large TVs throughout their houses. So this is going to be, you know, it's pretty standard stuff. And I, at the time was, at the time, I think I had like one television that was like very tiny. And I just remember thinking to myself, that executive lives like on a lake house with like a driveway with probably like 5 classic cars, right? Even though you may not be that extreme as a design leader, it may not be that extreme. You may not have Ferraris parked in your car, and your car park, you may not have like 15. You don't? 15, you may not have 15 rooms and gold-plated taps in your bathroom. You may not have those things, but you still may possess a delta between what you have, your resources, your experiences, than the person you're speaking to.
Yeah.
So as you're adapting, just remind yourself sometimes about that. So when you're asking somebody, hey, meet me halfway, or think about it from my perspective, remember those differences do matter.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and then I want to ask you, like, if you could define and set apart a good leader from a great leader, what key attribute would that be?
Mm-hmm. I think the difference between good and great, I think a great leader is really a servant leader who is there for his team, who wants the team to be successful, who is close to the needs, who has a lot of empathy, who gives a vision, so that basically they know in what direction that the team has to go, but that the team has also a lot of autonomy to then define the way themselves and the action, how to get there. So this is something I think has changed with the pandemic even more, because you can't control even less. So you have to, on one side, you have to inspire, you have to set the direction, but on the other side, you need to give a lot of freedom and trust, and let the control down, because you cannot control. Because if you start controlling and don't have trust and try to install systems to see who is doing how many maze and that task and all this, I think that this is going in the wrong direction. So at the end, of course, the output is important. A good leader comes to the output, but he comes to the output in the right way. And I think that makes the difference between a great and a good leader who is still like managing the old-fashioned way with a lot of KPIs and very close follow-up.
Excellent. Sophie, would you like to expedite on that, or do you have a certain opinion?
I think I would say that, I was just thinking as you were saying that, I think it is the synthesis actually of the two things that Felicia and Jan have talked about. It's the being an emotionally intelligent leader who is able to bring that quality of showing that they care deeply about their people, while also being able to be, when you need to be, you know, robust, because you can't just care and give everybody a hug. There are times that you have to say, maybe this isn't the right role for you, maybe this isn't the right organization for you, this is where you need to grow. I can love you as a person, but now I have to have a hard conversation with you as well. And bringing that together with what Jan is saying about giving your team that clarity in terms of the outcome you expect, not telling them how to do their job, not even necessarily telling them, you know, setting out the path, but continuously leading and saying, this is what I expect, this is what my vision not even my vision, but this is where we're trying to go as an organization. Let me give you that situational context. You've got to be a brilliant slight filter, but conduit to them, to where is the wider strategy, where is the wider purpose of what the organization is doing, so that they can execute for you. So I think I would just emphasize people to bring together those two elements that both Felicia and Jan have talked about.
Yeah, nice. And I love to see that really embodies, what I kind of mentioned in the beginning, the shift in design leadership, where it used to be, when I started working in what was it, 2007, it was still very, I started with an agency, one of the big agency, and it was very much like that. It was, non-emotional, like this is what and I love to see how that's adapting, seeing that within the design leaders themselves, to the user experience that are being created, how teams are functioning. I think that's a great shift, to show that this is going on within the larger organization. So yeah, let me then also move to the next question, because I think that really flows nicely into what we've just talked about. There are people here today that are designers, that are, aspiring design leaders. And you all have a very good reputation. You are design leaders with a great track record. So I would like, for each one of you to give advice. And then based on that, we can go a bit more into a conversation on what that really entails. Starting from today, knowing what kind of shift we are in to evolve to becoming that great leader in the future. So Sophie, would you like to start? What is your advice?
I think the thing you were saying just there about Zoe, actually, about that, you touched on it earlier, the kind of the is Don Draper the model of a design leader. I think there's something very important there about, there's perhaps a historical image of the artistic director, the creative director, who is a creative genius autocrat, right? Whose job it is to know what good design is, be the ultimate arbiter of taste. It's quite an aesthetic focused view of design, probably, who sort of imposes their will on everyone else. And I think particularly when we're talking about leadership in user-centered design, that is completely the wrong model of leadership. I think there's quite a subtle thing there about how I think it is really important that design leaders have opinions about what good design looks like. But one of our most important functions is to then also say, what I would like from a service isn't relevant. It's what our users want. And to be able to lead in that way that really focuses and anchors people constantly on, what do we know about our customers? What is the experience that they need? We are not our customers. We can't know everything. And really being very mindful of that balance of, sometimes you will be asked to take a bold position and opinion because we can never have perfect information, but constantly seeking that isn't just like me being a design genius, right? And it's really in the way that Jan talked about, pushing that decision making, that insight down to the teams who are actually closest to the problem.
And Jan, you wanted to add on to what you've just said?
Yeah, just I think the difficulty is basically on one side, you want the best people who have also strong personality, who bring in proposals, who help develop the company. And then on the same side, basically, if everybody is like that, then at the end is the difficulty, or the danger is that you're developing and pivoting in too many directions. So you have to always bring it back and repeat the vision and making sure that everybody is aligned. Otherwise, it's a mess. And you cannot just assume, just because you know it exactly in your head, that everybody else knows exactly what the vision is and how you. So really, the repetition is so important. And I think a lot of leaders forget that and say, okay, we do 2 town halls a year and say things you have done the leadership job, but it's not like that. It's much more.
Okay, I like what you just said, because this is also a question that I was thinking of, because it's a personal experience. I live with a creative director. Okay, so I have seen the shift from a creator a creative creator that moves into a leadership role. And you have to deal with that creative ego, to kind of let go of that creative ego of creating and showing your work, to managing people who are actually doing that work. So how can you advise that people who are watching today to step over that creative ego? Maybe Felicia, would you like to get into that? Not because I think you have a big ego.
How dare you? No, it's fine. No, I wanted to plus one. I definitely want to plus one what Jan was saying about the hiring a bunch of rock stars, basically, right? Because it touches on what your question is. So just quickly, I've absolutely been that. I used back in early 2000s. I worked for MTV. And MTV was very much like an agency world, top down. And there's also this like sense of, I'm sure that everybody here has probably had this experience where it's like, it was almost like a lifestyle, right? Every moment, every new product that came or project that came across your desk was your opportunity to do the best work of your life. And you put all of your emotion, you put all of your greatness into it, right? And you're like, I have the best ideas, especially true when you're young. I have the best ideas. Nobody else's ideas are as good as my ideas, right? I mean, still some people have that further into their careers, but it's especially true when you're young. When you first start to become a leader, you have that, you often carry that mentality with you. And I will tell you, the first time I was a creative director, I was 26 years old, and I threw my very like New Yorker best, top down, like best ideas in the room. I threw that at my team and I got smacked. It was not good. It was not good. And it was shocked me because I was like, what are you talking? How you're going up against my ideas? What do you mean that these aren't the best ideas possible? And it's a shock to the system because you realize it's that piece that both Sophie and Jan are saying. It's that ego, what you were saying. So it's like, your ego is it's wounded, right? Because at the end of the day, good ideas can come from anywhere. And as a leader, your role isn't to have the best idea. Hi, teacher, I have the best idea. I've got the best idea. It's not a competition of ideas. Unfortunately, there's a lot of industries out there or there's a lot of people out there that still believe this, but it isn't a competition of ideas. What it is you're trying to figure out what the best thing is for the user, right? What's the best thing for your end customer? And if you happen to have a great idea, that's awesome. But at the end of the day, you're not the only person who has to work on that. There's an entire team of people who have to work on that. And your idea is only one small piece of that. And it's got to evolve and it's got to change and it has to adapt. There's technical constraints, there's timing constraints, there's all different types of things. And you need to bridge all of the great ideas because no one idea is going to be able to do that. And I think for leaders, that is when you say, how does a leader get through that? Unfortunately, my personal
yeah,
is that it's going to happen. And it kind of has to happen. You kind of have to have that moment where somebody's like, no, that idea wasn't so great. You need that. You need that. Somebody to check you. And hopefully it happens a couple times.
Yeah, so I see you nodding like, yeah, that definitely happens to me.
It's good medicine. It's good medicine. You need someone to tell you one of your ideas was crap. Multiple of your ideas were crap because it helps you let go of the ego of the idea and you lean on the part of your job, which is to cultivate the best idea no matter where it comes from.
So Sophie, you want to mention one of your anecdotes as well? Yeah.
I wasn't going to. I think I was going to just really build on what Felicia said, that actually reflecting on as she was talking, I was thinking, I think for an aspiring leader, one of the things is to reflect really hard on why do you want to be a leader? Because I think sometimes people want to be leaders because you think that you're frustrated that your ideas don't go forward. And you think, if only I was in charge, if only I was in the boss, everyone would have to listen to my ideas and do what I say. And if that's why you want to be a design leader, then you're going to be very, very, very sorely disappointed, because actually as a design leader, the thing you will need to cultivate in yourself is being much more interested in everybody else's ideas. And it's a tricky path, I think, for an aspiring leader, because you go through this weird bit where you need to put yourself forward more initially to show that you're ready for leadership and to demonstrate those behaviors. And then when you hit this design leadership mode, suddenly your role is actually to sit back and shut up Like you should be, like someone said to me, you should be the last person to talk in the meeting, because you don't have to put yourself forward anymore as the person who's trying to pitch their thing. Your role is to sit back, listen to everybody else, and then go, right, I've heard all your ideas, and if you need me to help you make a call, this would be my call. But it's about you making a call between their ideas, not you saying, oh, well, I've heard of all your stuff and I have this wild, wacky, left field, super duper creative thing, because you're probably full of shit at that point, if you'll pardon my language, because they know the problem much better than you do.
Thank you for being so honest. Unless someone else really wants to go further into this topic, otherwise I would love to go into the Q&A. We have a couple of questions. Yeah, excellent. So we have the first question of Bob Shakespeare. When remote working, how would you replicate water cooler moments? There's probably more than one answer. I'm working with some NHS trusts who verbally sign in. Who would like to, because there was no mention of who it was directed to, but if someone has then I'm just going to appoint someone. Jan.
Okay, then I take it. So I think what is not working is to create some artificially. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I think everybody did it, like these virtual aperos where everybody is in front of the screen and then is having a drink. You do that once, it's fun, but it's never the same. And I think that is not really what is functioning. But what is working fine is these communication channels, which are always open. So these WhatsApp groups and Jabbers and whatever. And I think this is very healthy, because in the teams, then people can have jokes, can speak, can discuss, and that in a way has replaced a little bit the water cooler and coffee machine. It's still not the same, but it does a bit of the job.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question from Soma. What are some of non-negotiables, so absolute must-haves, that good design leadership should have in place to ensure geocultural and divertible-abled inclusivity, especially in design decisions? I feel that Felicia might want to give an answer to this one.
So if I understand the question correctly, how do we lean in or ensure or grow inclusivity and diversity? Well, the first thing, especially as a leader, the first thing that is going to be that you got to do is you have to really push yourself to bring people into your teams that are different from you. This is very difficult. And different from you doesn't necessarily mean, oh, they came from a different state from you or a different company from you, but they actually have perhaps a different design background, because you want to be able to increase your overall team's ability to look at solutions in different ways, or look at problems in different ways and present different solutions. If you have too many of the same people, whether it's background, company they came from, particular experience, you'll only ever have, you'll have a limited number of choices. You have a limited number of solutions that those people can come up with. It's very difficult as a leader, because oftentimes we want to be able to bring people in who are just like us, because we know how we are, we know how we feel, we can talk easily. You can talk with somebody more easily when they're like you, you can relate to them more easily when they're like you. So it is a very difficult thing. We see this most visibly, we see this in the industry as something that focuses on gender inclusivity, racial inclusivity, ableist inclusivity, a little bit less so that, but I think that's also quite important. Sexual orientation inclusivity. Those things are absolutely important. And I think it oftentimes when people bulk at the work that's done there, they're forgetting or perhaps don't know that products and teams that are more diverse outperform homogenous teams like time and time again. Those products are able to reach larger audiences, serve larger audiences, and they have more innovative solutions. So the proof is in the pudding. There's monetary advantages, if not just also personal advantages. Exactly.
Thank you. And then we have a question by Peter Boersma. How do the, oh, my questions are shifting because people are adding. How do the panelists feel about, sorry, yeah, here we go. How do the panelists feel about outsourcing some of the work that many see as leadership work to design ops departments? Example of that type of work include career ladders, OKR, KPI setting, defining design team culture, building relationships with other teams, PM, engineer, other stakeholders in design. Nice question, Peter. Sophie, would you like to get into that one?
My view on this is that this is a sign of the maturing of design leadership. That as a design leader, I have a design ops department, something we've initiated that started with a head of design ops, and he's now growing his team out. That's me delegating that chunk of what is required for design leadership to a dedicated specialist team. And to me, that shows a maturity of design in an organization, that you're not having one design leader trying to do everything, that they are starting to be able to delegate those crucial leadership priorities down to a strong enough team that can lead on those sort of things. It doesn't abdicate the responsibility of the design leadership to be providing strategic direction there, to be saying, potentially saying things like, yes, that is the culture I want, or no, that isn't the culture I want. Something, say, for example, the stuff that Felicia's just been talking about, to say as a design leader, we should be a diverse team and we should be welcoming and being inclusive to designers from very different backgrounds joining our team. And so if you're coming to me with a stereotypically tech bro-y kind of culture, I'm going to tell you that's not the design team culture we should be having here. But I mean, you hire into those roles to make sure people are going to bring those kind of priorities and reflect your priorities as design leader. So I see it as a positive. I mean, maybe it depends partly structurally. So design ops reports into me. If it was a completely separate department, I might feel a little bit differently and be saying, hang on, that feels a bit like fragmented as to how it's working. So I would be super interested in, perhaps if Jan and Felicia also have design ops in their organizations, whether that's working differently.
We do at Twitter, but I think some of those examples that Zoe read out, or in that question, lie within design ops, and some of them still lie within the manager, especially when it comes to building people, career ladders, helping to manage someone's path. That's definitely a strong relationship between your manager and an individual designer. So if that's being handled by design ops, I can understand why that could be potentially frustrating. But yes, very, very much like Sophie, just to agree with Sophie, it's about, what's the scale of the org? How can you scale a leader, right? Because it is very difficult to do everything. And if you're trying to do everything, it means you're not doing anything probably very well, right? So there's still some need to be able to get some support, and design ops can be very helpful for that.
Excellent, thank you. And then we have a question by Simon. And Sophie, as I mentioned, Simon complimented you on the Star Wars poster. I knew you would, Simon. So how can you develop your EQ? What do you practice? Anyone specifically would like to answer that? Yeah, I see you thinking very deeply. You're like, no! So what do you do to develop or to further strengthen your EQ?
I think it's you cannot just by making a course. It's really day-to-day work. You have to be reflective. You have to seek feedbacks, and then you work on it. And over the years, you can become proficient because it starts with the awareness and of the importance and having a coach who help you bring you to that level.
Let's phrase it differently then. Do you believe you are born with EQ and you are either good or bad at it, or is it a skill that you can actually develop?
I think it's a skill that you can develop, but maybe some have some facilities from a DNA perspective, and it's easier. But I strongly believe that basically everything shapes, and the environment is so important, and with who you are, and everything can be developed. So I think there's no way why it should not be that case. I think it's an easy excuse to say, okay, I'm like that, and I can't be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah. And I think that also comes back to what we've discussed, throughout actually the panel on emotional intelligence and on. So when we look at a team, you select people on their individual characteristics, but also, for example, when you look at the individual, you can also be looking at the cognitive diversity of your team. Which would also strengthen the emotional intelligence of your team. How do you select people based on that characteristic?
I can go on if you want. I think you have an idea about what is needed in your team to be successful and how it should be, basically to have the optimum output, and based on that, I think sometimes you can't just recruiting on skills and background is not enough. You need to also put in balance how his personality is, how he will interact with others, what he can bring in that perspective, and sometimes you have to calm down the team, and sometimes you have to bring energy in a team, and sometimes so I think these factors are important. Also, based on what product basically you are designing for. If you know you have a specific audience, then sometimes it's you can also help to hire somebody who really connects very well with that audience.
Felicia, I saw you were nodding heavily. Would you like to add on what John just said?
Yeah,
diversity.
Yeah, I think it's it's difficult sometimes when you're interviewing people. So if you're building a team from people who are internal, it's much easier for you to understand, what are the different strengths, what are the different areas what are the diverse set that they have. When you're hiring externally, you only get like a bit of a sliver, right, of people. You try to learn as much about them as possible. But for sure, I think it's important that you have a good balance. You can't have all people who are like, they do this sometimes in companies where they do like a color charting of people. So there's like red personalities who are, super like A-type personalities who are like they call them leaders, which is terrible, because actually you could be a leader no matter what your type is. You've got green type personalities who are more like loving and giving and, growth oriented. You've got yellow type personalities who are more about collaboration. You've got blue type personalities who are very data driven. Sometimes they illustrate it this way. And it is important that you have a balance of all those people, because if you have all red type personalities, you probably are working in a hellscape. Like, I'm just going to say, I don't know what that team is, but I definitely don't want to be on that team.
Don't want to work in that.
I don't want to work on that team.
Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left. I have one, there are a couple more questions and we'll get those answered. And you can mail with the Nomensa team to get the answers. But there's one specific question I want to end with. As a designer and aspiring leader, I struggle with confidence in communication, vital for leadership. How did you develop this, and do you have any tips? And I think we can only have one person and then we have to end. So Felicia, you're nodding strongly, but anyone? Yeah. Sophie, would you like to answer that?
Could you just repeat the question for me while I think about it?
As a designer and aspiring leader, I struggle with confidence in communication. So how can you, when you want to be a leader, but you're struggling with your communication skills, how can you further develop that? And do you have any tips for that specifically?
Wow. I mean, that's a really hard place to be in. I think, okay, that is a really hard place to be in when you're struggling with your confidence.
Anyone
I think sometimes there's the best thing I can do in 1 minute is the fake it till you make it, which isn't necessarily what you want to hear as someone who's struggling with confidence. But, find the area where you or other people tell you are good and strong, get lots of feedback on where your strengths are, and then focus on that part of it. And, if some coaching or something would help, practice with some of your being able to, speak out in meetings and things, do that. But broadly, most people don't see how you're struggling. We all lack confidence. I'm sure, you've seen me and Felicia and Jan and yourself, Zoe, here today looking like super confident people. Like, there have been times this week that all four of us are a puddle somewhere going, I can't do this, and I'm struggling, and I don't know how it is. So
I think that's key, to remember that everyone has insecurities and everyone at some point is nervous. And thank you. I really want to thank all of you for being open and candid with all of the questions. I really enjoyed this panel. So yeah, thank you. And I know, as Nomensa, we've been working with some of you closely together still, and in the past, I know for myself and the Nomensa team, we have a deep respect for you as professionals and what you've been doing. So thank you very much for being here today. Yeah, that was our panel. Thank you, Manuela. You may close.
Thank you all. It was such an insightful discussion. I really enjoyed it as well to follow. So next and last session of our Interglobal conference will be at 3 p.m. UK time. In this talk, Melanie Jenken, UX design lead at Google and founder of London Tech Ladies, will talk about how to build an inclusive team culture and will share with us lessons learned from building a team culture and how to focus on retaining and growing talents with diversity and inclusion in mind. We have come to this session. Thank you all again for joining, and see you at the last session at 3 p.m. UK time. And don't forget, there's still time to sign up via Eventbrite if you've done that. So thank you very much for joining. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.